Lachrymore, Shore of Secrets, Part 1. Oftentimes, the darkness around us is the product of the darkness within. Though we may interpret our reality as a prison, this truth need not stand. We find through the reclamation of our hearts that the shackles binding us were nothing more than fabrications. So will you falter to oblivion, or will you stare it in the face with a smile until it kneels to the light of your soul? That fateful night, the only guiding light were the stars above, dotting our course through the often treacherous waters of a vast and endless ocean. We had been sailing for about a week, and had anticipated we would make landfall in 4 days' time. One of the deckhands, Killian, was inspecting the ties on our cargo. Occasionally I would see him fiddle with one of the knots and mutter profanities about incompetent youth. Killian was a well-seasoned sailor who had spent many of his years at sea, taking on numerous arduous jobs. It seemed that the volatile nature of the great blue had taken its toll on him. I was no stranger to sailing myself, but I compared a mere novice to this man's accolades. I remember him telling me once that he single-handedly steered a vessel out of a great whirlpool, as his entire crew had been incapacitated by the violent nature of the anomaly. There was always a degree of pomp and circumstance to the tales he would share. I would often find myself pondering the authenticity of his claims, but nonetheless was well aware of his experience on the open ocean, so I never questioned it. As he prattled on about the aloof youngsters who handled our cargo, I noticed that another crew member was analyzing the path to our destination. Roan Hargraves was our navigator, his eyes ever affixed to the skies. Hargraves had a particular penchant for the cosmos. He would commonly educate us on the properties of stars and the boundless meanings hidden in the constellations. I never quite understood what he meant, but I was happy to hear something other than Killian's questionable conquests. A chilling breeze swept over the hull of the ship as the familiar creaking of wood cascaded around us. "Something's coming," Killian said gravely. The tone of his voice shook me a little. I could smell the petrichor through the salt of the sea. He was right. A storm was brewing, and it wasn't too far off. It wouldn't take long for the stars to be drowned out by a heavy blanket of cumulonimbus. Normally I wouldn't be fazed by a weather phenomenon, as most of the time I would have already made land or at least been close to it. I hadn't given much thought to the sheer distance we were traveling. Just over 3,000 miles. This had entirely eclipsed any distance I had traveled. I was shocked at the thought, and surprised I had not pondered the sheer distance we were traveling. We were delivering a rather sizable load of herbs and spices across the ocean to an allied nation, and I had taken the job as the pay surpassed that of many of my previous ventures. I had pondered the severity of the oncoming storm as the first of several raindrops brushed my cheek. "What do you see, Hargraves?" I said with an anxious hint. Roan turned his spyglass eastward, then westward. "Hard to say, Kline. It's pitch black." "My God, you're a genius, Hargraves," Killian stated sarcastically, grinning, showing a pair of golden teeth. A blinding flash of light illuminated our surroundings for but a second. Oddly, no thunder followed. "The center of that storm must be far off still," Killian said as the wind grew a little stronger. I was inclined to agree. I knew that on the ocean you wouldn't hear the thunder until the storm was incredibly close by. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that was slowly crawling up my chest. Something wasn't right. As the rain grew more intense and the waves swelled into a tremendous degree, lightning strikes increased in frequency, yet still no thunder. The winds had whipped up into a gale, making the ship near impossible to control. Our wheelman had already called for aid. 2 more men joined him in an attempt to keep the vessel on course. As I hurried to tie myself down, I witnessed a bolt of lightning just off starboard, expecting the explosive mumble of thunder to immediately follow, but once again was misled. I could hear Killian yelling at a couple deckhands to secure the sails, but upon their approach the winches were thrown overboard. He turned to the wheelman and shouted, "We ain't gonna make it through this! Sails are giving in!" Hargraves came bounding towards the back of the ship, shouting at Killian, "We don't have any other choice! Either we press forward or we sink!" Killian then turned his attention to me. "Ashton, give us a hand here, would ya?" I immediately jumped into action, barreled towards them. The ship was throwing me all around. Just getting to them was an endeavor in itself, but I eventually reached them and saw that Hargraves was pointing towards the shrouds. I could see that a couple had come loose, leaving the masts tossing in the wind. "Think you can cinch those back up?" "I can try," I replied, not totally confident in my abilities during such a crisis. but I knew I had to try. I began trying to climb the rat lines that had also become loose in the ordeal. As I reached the loose ends, I found I couldn't tighten them back up enough to where they'd hold. I however found that if I could use my weight and hang off of them slightly, I could keep the mast up to some degree. It was obviously not much, but it was marginally more stable than before. This seemed to be enough to regain control of the ship, and almost by divine intervention, I felt the winds wane. We were coming out of the most intense part of the storm. Just as quickly as the silent tempest had come, it had gone. The rain still fell, but the waters had calmed themselves. I could hear various members of the crew cheering. I released the shroud lines and somberly climbed down. 2 men had been thrown overboard, lost to the unforgiving fury of that storm. And people were fucking cheering. I laid down on the deck, paralyzed by the adrenaline forcing its way through me. "Holy shit, Kline, you're crazy," I heard Hargraves say. "See that, Hargraves? Now that's a genius," Killian bellowed. As everything settled, I could once again see the stars above. At that moment, I could see why Hargraves was such a fanatic. Seeing the stars had become my new favorite thing. "You think we're in the clear?" the wheelman asked. "Not sure. We're still a ways from land," Hargraves replied. "Maybe we can..." Immediately, there was a thunderous sound of snapping wood. I was thrown to the front of the ship. I careened over the rail and into the cold depths. My vision was blurry. I was fading out as the frigid water sent my body into shock. I quickly scrambled over to a sizable piece of wood, and with the last of my strength managed to clamber onto it. As my breathing slowed and my eyes grew heavy, I was sure that I wasn't waking up. As my vision faded, one final thought crossed my mind as I caught a final glimpse of the night sky. God, I love the stars. I awoke still and face down. The damp wood of my derelict life raft pressed hard into my face, the smell of salt water lingering heavily in my nostrils. I reached my arms above my head to hang them off the sides. I was immediately gripped with a feeling of shock and discombobulation. What I was feeling over either side of my driftwood savior was not water. In fact, it wasn't even wet. As I ran my hands across the mysterious substance, my head shot up in amazement. I was running my fingers through sand. I began cackling like a madman as I lifted the grains into the air and let them flow through my fingers in a cascade. I dropped once again onto the raft with a huge grin painted on my face. I was so lost in this euphoric feeling, likely caused by dehydration, that I barely noticed the frigid wind rushing over my body. As I rolled over to look ahead, all I could see was what looked like snow on the embankment separating the beach I was washed upon and whatever lied beyond. I was puzzled as to why there would be snow here in the dead of summer. The crisp air nipping at my skin felt off, as though I was being warned about something. I cast a glance backwards toward the now calm ocean. Where did the ship end up? Killian. Roan. I had pondered whether they met their demise at the hands of the cruel waters, or had made it ashore with me. Looking back towards the darkness beyond the embankment, I wondered if it was worth trekking ahead, or if my chances fared better staying on the beach. Just as I was about to get to my feet, I saw a peculiar light meandering through the tree line. The way it moved told me that it was a person. Perhaps a member of the crew had gotten here before I did. After all, I had no idea how long I was out for on the aimless driftwood prior. As the light grew closer, I could barely make out the visage of a man. I could see that he wore a rather long, unkempt beard, unlike anyone I knew on the crew. Furthermore, he appeared to be donning a robe, the likes of which I had never seen. It was clear to me that this man was a stranger. I stood frozen. I didn't exactly have a means of escape. Like a frightened deer, I awaited the headlights ominously approaching me. He stopped at the embankment and seemed to fix his gaze on me for a prolonged period of time before calling out. "Are you all right?" he shouted. A level of relief finally overcame me, as if his words cut the insurmountable tension that had held me in place. Before I could force out an answer, I spotted several more lights swelling through the trees. Was there a village of people here? As their faces began appearing, I could see that there were at least 20 people staring back at me. The first man who had appeared climbed down and made his way towards me. "You're looking a little worse for wear, my friend," he said calmly.